it's important. And then the other thing, then we'll look at some tactics in defending our faith. Last week we heard some tactics, but we're going to focus specifically tonight on the teachings from a book, Tactics, by Greg Koukl. So none of this that we'll talk about is anything that's original to me. It's all from Tactics and Stand to Reason, and I'll give you a handout here with that information on it. We think everybody should read that book, Tactics, and we think everybody should memorize it. And so Alan Schleman, who is with Stand to Reason, he put together this PowerPoint, so we can just use the PowerPoint, but just use it as a way of discussing tactics. But first, what we'd like you to do is, we're going to do this, so this section will be brief, and then we'll look at tactics for the rest of the section, rest of tonight. Take 5 minutes, break up in groups of, 12 or 2. What part of your life, this is specifically addressed to believers. If you're not a believer, you get a pass. You can kind of just watch people struggle or poke holes at people. What part of your life do you think? What parts? And so let's think through whatever that you think it is. What parts of your life are secular, and what parts of your life are sacred? In the sense of what are some of the areas of my life that are just secular? They don't have anything to do with my Christianity. And then what are areas of my life that have everything to do with my Christianity? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and see if you can answer that question. Then this is a house, just trust me, right? Some of you that are artists. I didn't quite understand how to make this. I couldn't make this black, so we're going to work on this side of the board. But I probably should have had one of the artists draw, but just trust me, there's a door. This is a house, okay? Anybody have any ideas of things that would be just secular, or things that would be what we call sacred, or have to do with your faith, have to do with Christianity? Anybody want to venture, Ashley?
Some people can go from being rude to ratchet, like secular to not sex. Sacred to not sacred.
Okay, so yeah, it's true. Yeah, no, yeah, that's one, and that's actually you're getting to exactly where we want to. You're getting exactly where we want to get. Anybody else? Yes.
Honesty.
Which would be where?
So I don't know. It would be secular.
Just secular?
Yeah, mainly because there is this thing as being too honest and not in a graceful way.
Dude.
So.
Honesty, but only so much.
Or how I say it.
Yeah. All right. Honesty, but not honestly. Sort of honest.
Too honest.
Too honest. Yeah.
Yes.
In our group, we talked about movies and music a lot, and there are Christian movies and there is Christian music, but a lot of the time I think we gravitate towards secular.
Okay. Any other ideas? Thoughts? Yes.
We said education because a lot of times when you're in your classes.
Secular?
Yeah, secular. Like unless you have a professor who's a Christian or Christian friends, you don't really talk about the gospel.
So it's very easy to just compartmentalize those, right? Yes.
Rush hour traffic.
That'd be sacred, right?
Well played.
Traffic. And your reactions to traffic.
Honest.
Not yours, of course, because you're a saint, but other people. Yes, Barb.
I think relationships or friendships can be both sacred and secular just because depending on who you're around with, the conversation can go from one way to another. So it depends on the friendship or relationship you got with some certain people. So.
Okay. What else? What about anything up in the sacred? Oh, that?
I was going to say politics.
Politics. Secular? So what do we got? Anybody? What about the sacred?
Monday nights at 7.
Yeah, Ratio.
right at the top.
I didn't do that on purpose. Church. Right? What else?
Reading your Bible.
Reading your Bible? Yeah. All right. So this is my challenge to you. My challenge to you is that's not a Christian view of any of this. My challenge to you is that there is nothing in this world, if Christianity is true, that God doesn't look down on and say, mine. There is nothing that is purely secular. There is nothing in which the gospel, in which God's truth does not go all around, inside, outside, and all through. So when you are, and I'm not just, when you are watching because here's the worry that happens when you separate these, and this is just a example that Francis Schaeffer used to use in this house. So what he would say is the way that the world divides these things up is they say there's secular things and then there's sacred things, and there's this line of demarcation in which you don't transverse between the top to the bottom. And it's fine if you want to keep your sacred things sacred, but keep them to yourself, right? So don't bring it into your education, don't bring it into class, because we're talking about real stuff. So if you want to believe something, that's fine for you, but keep it to yourself. But don't you dare bring it down here into the real world where we're dealing with the reality. Now, if Christianity is true, it is reality. The gospel is reality. There is nothing in this world that God doesn't look down on and say mine. So there is no sacred, secular divide, which means I cannot, if I'm walking this Christian life the way that we are commanded to, I cannot compartmentalize myself. And I cannot say, well, when I'm in my class, I'm just a secular person because my teacher's secular, and when I'm in traffic, I can do whatever I want because, hey, I'm in traffic. But then so I'm on the way to traffic, I do whatever I want, but then when I get to church, that's when I put on my church face, and that's when, how's things going? Oh, everything's going great, praise Jesus, right? But then when I leave, then I'm cutting people off right? Relationships and friendships. Right? Well, these are my non-Christian friends, so I act differently around my non-Christian friends than I do around my Christian friends. Politics. Someone brought up politics. Can you have a discussion about your politics in which your Christian worldview does not inform your view on that political issue, whatever it is? No. None. The worry that we have is that in the way that our culture has taught us about this being true, which I think it's not, is that many of you wear different hats. So when we're at, say, Ratio, or when we're at church, or when we're at Bible study, we're one person. But then we go to class and we're a different person. But then we go to our work and we're even a different person. Or when we're in traffic, we're a different person. Or maybe we're in our relationship, depending on what kind of relationship it is, we're a different person. When we're talking politics, we're a different person. And so even when we're talking economic systems, well, I don't bring Christianity into that. What we want to challenge you on is that all of this is sacred. All of this is informed by my Christian worldview. And if I don't bring my Christian worldview to bear weight on these issues, then probably I'm going to be thinking about them wrongly. Now that's hard, I get that. But that just means that everything I do, if I'm a Christian, everything I do is informed by my Christian worldview. All right, so that's what I want to say about that. Okay.
Aaron, one
yes,
point
question,
today.
comments?
I think part of the reason we have the secular-sacred divide today is in large part because we as Christians have allowed that to happen.
No, I would say 100%. We've bought into this. We've bought into this just as much as the secular world is pushing that, and we've bought into it. And so I know, I know Christians that would say, when I was having this conversation with somebody, that when I'm at my job, I have to cheat, basically, is what they're doing. They're breaking the law, because if I don't, I'll get fired. And they're rationalizing it through themselves, saying, "Look, this is just my job." Now, while we're doing this stuff, they're just as they're espousing all the holy views that everybody would have in the book. But when I'm down here and on my job, you just don't see it's different. You don't understand. I have to have this job, and I have to break the law in order to do this. That's what they're doing. They're breaking the law. No. And what's going to happen is when you start buying into this worldview, you're going to see that you're going to start you're just going to start separating your Christianity out more and more and more so that it becomes this little slice of your life that somehow you think is going to inform everything. And it just basically just means what you do on Sunday mornings. But what we see in Scripture, what we see when people are willing to give up their lives to go to Mexico to share the gospel, are people who have recognized that everything is sacred. And everything, and we're not buying into the lie that's being pushed on us by a secular world. Yeah.
I think it's also part of it is we have a faulty view of what it means to be a Christian. We think that it means accepting Jesus, and then we change all these things about our life or God, whereas it's actually, it's a union much like a marriage union, where when we are in Christ, we can't separate us from Christ.
Right.
Like when a husband and a wife are one flesh, they're not to be separated. And so, all the language in the Gospels and the New Testament that talk about if you are in Christ, it's this spiritual union where Christ and us are one, and we can't leave that, leave our hat at the door when we enter the school or the courtroom or anywhere else. That's who we are. We're a new person, and it's not just an identity that we've kind of added onto ourselves.
And when we start wearing this, when we start pretending like we're wearing the different hats, we can start making all kinds of excuses for different things and the way we're living our lives. Because we say, well, this is just different. These are my different parts of my life. I'm compartmentalizing everything. And so actually this is part of what we'll talk about this weekend on the retreat as we look at 1 John is sort of wrestling through that and understanding what that looks like for your life. So anyway, so think about this, and then I'll have you get back in your groups and maybe think about that, agree, disagree, but then also thinking about this, defending your faith. Okay, when you think evangelism, do you think, man, I'm excited? Do you think I'm freaked out? Or do you think, kind of somewhere in between? When you think sharing your faith with an unbeliever, do you think, man, let's get ready to fight? Does that bring up fear in your mind? Or do you just say, I don't even want to engage in that, I just want to run? So what do you think about when you think about evangelism? And then, do you have any examples of where you think it was done well and examples where you think it was done terrible? I think we can probably all think of one where it's done terrible, but we'll let one person share about that. So in our groups, what do you think about this? Again, I want you to talk about it. If you have questions, concerns, certainly it's not true just because I say it, so I want you to wrestle through this yourself. But then, what do you, when you think about sharing your faith, do you relish it? Are you looking forward to it? Or are you, super freaked out? Or are you just, well, I kind of know I probably should, but I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say. And then, what are some examples you've seen of maybe where it's done well and where it's been done bad? All right, so take 5-10 minutes to talk about that. Again, for purposes of recording, we are presenting to you tonight, or I'm presenting, this is material that's just straight out of the book called Tactics by Greg Koukl. We think that everybody should read this book because it's just, it's just such an important book in regards to how you can engage in these conversations. Alan Schleman works with Greg at Stand to Reason Ministries, which is a ministry that we also fully endorse. I think I really love their work. They just have a lot of really, really good stuff. So you can see on the handout at the bottom, str.org, lots and lots of good material. I encourage you to go to their website to get information and then get a copy of the book. Sometimes, like in the past, the first semester we were here, we took 6 weeks to went through this information. And tonight we're going to do it in one night. So obviously you're just getting a brief glimpse of some of this stuff, but their stuff is just really, really good. So these are Alan's slides, and again, the material comes from the book Tactics. We are called to be ambassadors for Christ. Okay, all of us. Now again, so every one of us. There is no special place for some. Like pastors are not better Christians than other people, right? I mean, you just have the ability to teach. A pastor has the ability to teach or something. But we are all called to be ambassadors for Christ. Okay, and STR, they use this model. They actually have a really good curriculum that you can walk through. The ABC curriculum, becoming an ambassador for Christ. Greg would say, we get this from 2 Corinthians 5:20, that in order to be an ambassador, you need to have knowledge, an accurately formed mind, and this is what a lot of what we do with Ratio. Here's why we believe what we believe. Here's the evidence. Here's the reasons why you can believe that this stuff is true. You need to have wisdom, which is an artful method. I need to have wisdom in how do I engage with people, which is actually what we'll talk about tonight. And then you need to have character, right, in an attractive manner. How many of you know someone who may be telling you in the past may have been telling you Christian truths, but they're a jerk about it? Ashley was very quick to raise her hand, right? Yes. We all know someone like that, right? And now it doesn't mean that what they're saying isn't true. It just means I want to have a personality that people are interested in what I have to say, right? They're tell me more about this Jesus that you're talking about because something's different about the way that you're living your life, right? So character is not, we'll talk about that, and actually, in fact, we'll talk about that some this weekend as we look at holiness in 1 John. Knowledge we'll talk about, all throughout the rest of the year. So tonight, we're actually focusing on wisdom, an artful method. How do we do this? And how do we engage with people in ways that's not just yelling at them, preaching at them, screaming at them, those kind of things. And how do you do it in a way that as we say, keeps you in the driver's seat? So when I'm having these discussions, how can I sort of stay in the driver's seat, but at the same time not just be preaching at people or just dictating information to people? Usually when you're in these conversations, if I'm just lecturing people, what are they doing? Probably just not listening. They're zoned out. So what we're going to teach you basically is learn how to ask good questions. Right? So we want to be able to present the truth clearly and cleverly. We want to be able to choreograph our interactions, again, so that I can stay in the driver's seat, but I'm still asking good questions. We can stop people in their tracks if they're aggressive by sort of learning some good ways to respond. And then really we can recognize people's bad thinking for the purpose of guiding them to the truth. Okay? All of what we want to do in evangelism, really, is you want to show people what is true, right? As Christians, we believe Jesus is the truth, right? And so I want to introduce people to Jesus. And so if they don't know Jesus, their thinking is wrong in some way. So most of what I'm doing is helping them understand where their thinking is wrong. And I think what we'll see is I can do that probably better by asking questions than by telling them. Now, what I'm not dealing with, obviously, tonight is the theological way that this happens. So, Calvinism, Arminianism, all those things that we're not talking about that, like how God works in His economy to make these things happen. So we're just talking about how we, as ambassadors of Christ, can engage in these conversations with what is our goal. Now, many of you think, right, when you were talking about your fear in evangelism, many of you, and I think this is true of me, my fear is that if I engage in someone in a conversation, I have to get to the cross. I feel like I have to get to the cross in every conversation. So I start talking, and it's like I'm just trying to maneuver it so I can just get to the cross and give them the gospel. What I would like to challenge you today, this is what Greg challenges us in, and when I first started thinking about this, is most times, a good conversation is just what he calls putting a rock in somebody's shoe, putting a stone in their shoe. If you can have somebody walk away from a conversation thinking with a stone in their shoe, metaphorically, what happens when you get a stone in your shoe? It feels uncomfortable, you just got to deal with it, right? So what we're trying to do is intellectually put a stone in their shoe. Have them walk away from the conversation thinking, that's true, I never thought about that. Oh, that's okay. I didn't really think about that before. And then what are the implications of that? Because we don't have, if we're building relationships with people, it may be that I'm not going to just have this conversation where I just get right to the gospel right away. Now, it may be that you are, and maybe this is the time that God has ordained for us to have that conversation. But we don't have to put all this pressure on ourselves that we have to get to the cross in every conversation. Maybe this conversation, I'm just challenging him or her with one thing that's going to move them along in their spiritual journey, and then somebody else, or maybe I can pick it up later on where we can have further conversations. So that takes the pressure off of you. But one of the things that we'll talk about as we walk through some of these tactics is they're not just tricks. You can make people look silly if you're having discussions about religion with people, because most people have not really thought about why they believe what they believe or even what they believe. And so if you start asking questions and using some of these tricks to, some of the tactics will help you see tonight, you can actually belittle people or humiliate them. That is the furthest thing from what we're trying to teach you how to do. Because you can win an argument and you can walk away being like, yeah, I totally just demolished that person. And what have you accomplished? You won an intellectual argument. Good job. But that's not the point of anything we're trying to do. The whole point of everything we're trying to do is we want people to know Jesus, right? And so if I come across, if I could win the argument, I could lose the man or, the woman because they don't want to have anything to do with me anymore because I made them look silly. So we actually, many times, we have to work to try to help the person not be humiliated in these conversations because they just haven't really thought about these things before as we're trying to ask questions, as we're trying to move them along to, again, put a stone in their shoe, put a rock in their shoe, okay? All right, anybody anybody relish the encounter? Anybody relish the fact of evangelizing? Yeah? I mean, that's probably what, you just love talking to people about Jesus? Amen, that's all, good, that's great. What?
I went out praying for people and I met this guy, so it's pretty cool.
That's why, amen. And look, there are certain personalities that's, I know Koukl just has that personality. Okay, you just have that personality, right? Which is great. That's not all of us, right? Not of us all have that. All of us have that personality. Some of us, we try to avoid it. But if you can just learn to ask a couple good questions, which we'll talk about tonight, anybody can. You don't have to be able to recite all of Philippians to go and evangelize somebody. If you can just ask a couple good questions, then we can do it. Anybody have any examples of bad tactics? Anybody have an example of examples of where someone or maybe not know, but you've been privy to bad evangelism? Maybe we see it pretty much in the amphitheater at least once a year, or twice, right? Brother Ross, not exactly, maybe the artful method, he kind of missed that part a little bit. The sad thing about when Brother Ross is there is you feel like about 70% maybe the stuff he says, you're like, no, yes, I agree. And then he's calling people whores and and telling everybody they're going to hell. And you're like, no, definitely not. And then everybody's just gangs up on him, and then everyone just it just becomes just a show. And then we have somebody like when we had Dustin in the amphitheater last week. We were sitting there. We were sitting there at the back. I think Lance and I were sitting there, and some guy walks up and he's like, what's going on? And then the guy's like, is this guy like Brother Ross? And they're like, no, he's actually using logic and reason. Like, all right, I'm not interested. And they just left. If we were going to have a chance to fight, then he wanted to be a part of it. But just someone making a cogent, logical case. Hey, Dubs was calling, right? I had something else going on. But anybody have any examples in your own life of? Tom.
I think a lot of times bad tactics can follow from bad theology. When I first became a believer, I was part of a Baptist church that went out on visitation night. So we would go out, visit people that filled out a card on Sunday, and I didn't know a whole lot about the Bible, but when I went to somebody's house and they admitted that they were not a Christian, I would sit on their couch with my arms crossed, and I wasn't going to leave until they made a profession of faith. And it wasn't until later that I came to read my Bible and realized, you know what? God's the one that prepares the heart. God has different people at different points along the journey, and I may be the first contact with the gospel. I may be their 7th contact, their 21st. But when the harvest is right, God's going to use whoever, however skilled they are, in order to bring in the harvest. And so that's just faulty theology on my part, that I needed to be the starter, the middle reliever, and the closer. I needed to pitch a complete game
In 1 hour.
Yeah, on somebody's doorstep without them inviting me in, and that's just not going to happen. If it does happen, it's going to be a human conversion. We've almost inoculated them against the gospel, because now they believe they're a Christian, rather than it being a genuine regeneration of the heart by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I think, however it happens, I think we do our part, we trust God to do His part. God's part's much, much more important than our part. But if He's ordained the means as well as the ends, and again, we get into some theological discussions, but He's called us all to be evangelists and all of us to be ambassadors. So, again, if you believe this is true, you should want to share your faith, right? You should want to share the gospel. Yeah, did you?
Yeah.
knowing who you're talking to and really dealing with it, you can do that is by asking questions, which is why this whole topic is so important. But I remember one time I was doing some evangelism with a group, and they had these shirts that said, Jesus made me kosher. We were going out to evangelize Jewish people. And
Are you wearing that shirt?
I was wearing this shirt, Super Jew. But my dad and I refused to wear their shirts. And they're like, why don't you wear our shirts? So like, because you're offending every single person you're going to try to go talk to by telling them that, like, Orthodox Jews, they're not kosher. You know what I mean? Which has nothing to do with being kosher. You know what I mean? Like Jesus, anyway. So, you know, you don't want to go and put a T-shirt on that says Joseph Smith's a heretic, a liar, and you know,
Right.
no, married little girls. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You don't.
Right. This goes to an art. I mean, wisdom.
Yeah.
If I'm trying, I mean, if you want people to know the truth, if we were doing a pro-life thing a couple years ago, and I mean, I am adamantly pro-life. I've told you. I mean, I've told many of my testimony. It's because of, you know, decisions that I made when I was younger, where when I was in college, where we had an abortion, paid for one, and so adamantly pro-life. But a student who came to, we were doing some pro-life outreach, and he came wearing a shirt that with a gun that said, "Would it make you feel better if we used a gun?" And I was like, you probably don't want to wear that if we're trying to reach out to people. I mean, we want to have a wisdom. We want to have wisdom, and we're trying to we're trying to change hearts and minds, and no one's going to listen to you if you're wearing that. Yeah.
I think there's also a danger of swinging the pendulum the other direction, and you can be too confrontational, too accusatory. You can also water down the gospel to a point where you don't convict of sin, and you don't preach that you need Jesus as a Savior, and just more of a feel-good, we love each other and we do good deeds to each other religion, more so than like the saving grace of Christ.
Which is probably more where we are in the South now.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? I mean, if we're honest, most of us, hey, you're a Christian? Yeah, I was born in the South. Yeah, I go to church. That means I'm a Christian, right? No. And so the tactics can help us by asking good questions. So if I ask you, if you say you're a Christian, well, we'll move right into this, okay? So the Columbo tactic, now most of you don't know who Columbo, does anybody know who Columbo is? Some of you, all right, some of you, if you're older or you have Netflix or you're super old. Columbo was a detective, right? He was just always just in a mess, and he would come into this crime scene and it would just be a mess, and then he would, he'd say, well, there's one last thing, something about this thing bothers me, and then he'd ask a question. Then he'd ask another question. Then he'd ask another question. Now, he was actually super smart. He was just setting everybody up, and he would, then he would solve the case, right? He would do it in an hour. So we are, the Columbo tactic, Koukl calls the Columbo tactic the queen mother of all tactics, and all it is learning to use questions instead of statements. So think about this. Never make a statement when you could get the same point across, or you could make the same point with a question. Why? Because if I'm telling you something versus asking you a question and making you do the thinking and the response, which one do you think you're more actively engaged in? The second, right? If I'm talking, you can ignore me, you can be just thinking about your response, but if I'm asking you questions, you're going to have to think through, and then think through the answer, and then respond, and then if I'm doing a good job with this, I'm listening to your response, and now what am I going to do next? Ask you another question. The beauty of this is the other person is doing all the work, and all I'm doing is asking good questions. But guess what the other person thinks about me?
You're just interested.
Wow, this person's really interesting.
That's right.
You know why? Because interested is interesting. He goes, what is your number one thing you like to talk about?
Yeah.
Yourself, right? So this person, when I'm asking questions about themselves, and I'm like, whoa, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. What do you mean by that? Tell me, oh, that's interesting. How'd you come to this conclusion? We're following that out. Now they're doing all the talking, and they're like, wow, that was a great conversation. I want to have more. And they're doing all the work, and all I'm doing is learning to ask good questions. I'm listening, which means you've got to, most of us are not good listeners. I'm not. And I've got to be engaged so I can actually ask the questions. Okay? But I want to ask questions instead of making statements. Now that is hard. But Koukl challenges you to start getting in the habit. So if you can think about this, for the next week, really for the rest of your life, but for the next week, see if when you get in a conversation, you can get in the habit of asking about 6 or 7 questions each conversation. And you'll realize how hard it is because we're just not conditioned to do that. Most of us, we just talk past each other. I'll talk for a bit, you'll talk for a bit. I'm not listening to anything you're saying, you're not listening to anything, we're having a conversation. But we're not really having a conversation, right? So when I'm asking you questions, now you're not turning this into an interview. Like you're not, it's not, you're the detective and you're just, you gotta, again, artful method. So I'm not just, tell me the truth, give me the answers, right? So I want to have some, some good sense and wisdom about that. But I'm asking good questions before I move on in the conversation. Okay. So again, we said, what is the value of asking questions? Interested is interesting. They're doing all the work. I'm in the driver's seat. If I'm asking good questions, lots of times I'll be having conversations with people and I'll know where I want to get to, but instead of just telling them that, I'll ask questions to get there, and I'm still getting where I want to go, but now they're doing all the work, they're answering questions, and probably, hopefully, they're listening and thinking through these things, and again, maybe a stone is being put in their shoe. Francis Schaeffer said, if I only had 1 hour with someone, I'd spend 55 minutes asking questions and then maybe 5 minutes sharing something of the truth. I know for me, that's usually the exact opposite. I mean, if we're honest, right? I'll spend 55 minutes blabbing and then, oh yeah, what did you have a question about? But the exact opposite of the way that we want to be. We want to find out, because we want to find out where this person is, and the only way you're going to do that is by asking questions. Because what's going to happen is people are going to say things and you're going to assume you know what they mean by that. And almost assuredly you're going to be wrong. So that's why the first question, the key, the mother of all Columbo questions, according to Koukl, the first question is what we use to gain information, and it's something along the lines of, what do you mean by that? Now, if you've been around Ratio for any time, you'll know that we always want to ask that question over and over and over. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Right? Why? Because most of the time, we are using the same words, but we mean different things by them. Okay? Here's an example. Everybody, immediately right now, think of the word bank. All right, everyone in your head? All right. Now, what am I thinking about?
Money.
Basketball.
What's that?
Basketball.
See, usually that's the first time I heard that one, right? You're thinking about a place where I keep money, or just making bank, right? Yeah. You're thinking about playing basketball, right? Bank shot. What? Anybody else have any other things we're thinking? Yeah.
A river.
You're thinking about the side of a river, the bank of the river, right? So just using the word bank doesn't tell me anything. The question is, what do you mean by that? Okay? What else is important? I mean, this is maybe up here. Someone tells you they don't believe in God. In 3 weeks, you can, after like 4 or 5 weeks, we'll go through all these different arguments for God's existence. So you can give them the Kalam, you can give them the moral argument, you can give them Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which John will talk about. You can do all that, or you can do something much more important and 10 times better. You can ask them what? Because almost assuredly, in fact assuredly, they do not have the same understanding of God that I do. Because if they had the same understanding of God as I do, they would bow down on their knees and worship. So they don't believe in that. What if they believe God's some old man in the sky who's just throwing lightning bolts at people, and you convince them that God exists? You don't believe that God exists. So the better question is not, the better tactic is not to just start dumping information at them. The better question is ask them, well, okay, what do you mean by that? That's interesting. All religions are basically the same. Is that true, first of all? We talked about this a couple weeks ago. No. So I could tell them, no, it's not true. In fact, they all teach different things, and I could give them a whole lecture on that. Or I could ask them, that's it. Well, tell me more. What do you mean by that? What do you mean they're all basically the same? Because now they're going to have to, probably for the first time, break down something that they've never had to do before, because usually what they've been able to do is say something like that, and then the Christian just starts lecturing at them. And they've never actually had to think beyond level 1 on the statement like that. The Bible isn't reliable. Oh, that's okay. Well, what do you mean it's not reliable? I'm interested more. Tell me more. What do you mean by that? I'm pro-choice. What does that mean? Well, probably right now everyone in our head thinks we know what it means. But wouldn't Koukl tells a story of, he said a friend of his, he said, can you teach me about Hinduism? Or no, sorry, can you teach me about Buddhism? because my friend is Buddhist, and I want to know all the things there is to know about Buddhism, so I can, give him all the answers and refute all his arguments and become a Christian. And Koukl says, wouldn't it be better to just ask him what he believes? Because I can give you all the information about what I think the kind of Buddhist he is, but how do you even know that that's the kind of Buddhist he is? So why don't you just ask him what he believes? And so he did, and then it goes from there. The unborn is not human, but a potential human. What do you mean by a potential human? What does that mean? You ever thought about when people? Because this argument, what would a potential human be? But what does that mean? And so this is a good point. Some people they'll just reword what they said by saying something else. And you want to say, okay, so someone's a fetus. Okay, what do you mean by fetus? What is that? But what is a potential human? That's interesting. I'd want to know what that person has to say about that, right? And what this does is it avoids making the straw man fallacy. Okay, the straw man fallacy is when I knock over, I take an argument, it's not I pretend it's this, and then I knock it over. But that's not the position that they were really holding. So when I ask them information questions, like, what do you mean by that? I'm getting information so that I don't attack the straw man, I actually deal with their actual argument, okay? So the first question, the first Columbo question, gives us information, tells us what a person thinks. The second Columbo question tells us why they think what they do. So, what do you mean by that? Some kind of variation of that is the first thing we want to find out. And then secondly, we want to figure out, why do you hold that position? Right? And we're going to do that by asking another simple follow-up question, which is, we're talking about reversing the burden of proof, but we're going to ask a simple follow-up question, which is, how did you come to that conclusion? Now, we talk about reversing the burden of proof here, because here's the problem, here's what usually happens. Okay? Somebody says something like, I'll skip here. The Bible has been translated and retranslated. Okay? I'll back up for a second. The Bible's been translated and retranslated 1,000 times. You ever heard someone say something like that before? And then what do? No, it hasn't. And then you just go on like a 10-minute tirade about how they don't know what they're talking about. Now, I think we've got the goods. I think we've got the evidence. I would submit they don't know what they're talking about, because that's just not true. But that's not the best. Number one, that's not the best tactic, because now I'm just talking and they're probably ignoring me. But number two, this person has made a claim. And what have we done? They've made a claim, and we've said, basically, you can make a claim and you don't have to bear the burden of actually giving any evidence for that position. I'll now take that burden on me. So in the court of law, right, so Tom and I are attorneys. If the prosecution is bringing, anybody here ever been charged with it? Well, some of you have. Let's speak tickets because I've represented you. But lawyer-client confidentiality, I'll keep that to myself. Some of you have been charged with speeding tickets, right? And so the prosecution would bring, if you decided to fight it, they would bring evidence, right, to prove their case. Right? But they can't just say, right, I charged Kunal with speeding, and then sit down and say, now defend yourself. They have to give evidence to make their case. And what happens is, when we don't hold them to their burden, we let them make a claim, and then they don't have to back it up with evidence. So all you're doing when you're reversing the burden is you're making somebody, when they make a claim, you're assuming that they have reasons why they believe it, and you're asking them to give you the reasons. Now, almost assuredly, what's going to happen is if you ask these kind of questions, what are you going to be faced with? Probably a blank stare. Because most likely people have not ever been challenged on something like this. They've never been challenged to give reasons why they believe something. They've been able to say it and then listen to a Christian just launch into a 20-minute tirade. And so most likely they're going to stare back at you, in silence. And again, you want to just say, well, you've made the claim, right? Here, you've made this claim, so what are your reasons that are holding up your argument? But you're assuming what? That they actually have reasons. You're assuming that they've got reasons for why they believe what they believe. 9 times out of 10, most people are just parroting things to you that they've heard in culture, and they haven't really thought through these things, right? So here's a couple of examples. And you can ask the question, how'd you come to that conclusion? The Bible has been translated and retranslated. Again, you can go off and you can say how they just clearly don't understand Bible transmission and they don't understand how this stuff was done. Or you could just ask them, well, how'd you come to that conclusion? Tell me the information that you researched to come up with that conclusion. Jesus taught reincarnation after traveling to India. You ever heard this before? Yeah, there's a lot of New Age believers believe this stuff. Where'd you get that information from? Wouldn't you like to know? Would you like to know if that's true? Yeah, I'd like to know. So tell me your sources. I'm interested if that's true. Joseph Smith is a prophet of God. Joseph Smith, Mormon, founder of Mormonism. Why should I believe that about Joseph Smith? Tell me, give me reasons why I should hold that position. Or the universe came into existence by itself. Do you have any reason to believe that? Do you have any evidence to back that up? In fact, we'll look at that in a couple weeks as we look at arguments for God's existence. Right? All religions are basically the same. Why would anyone think that? Science has proven the Bible wrong. Right? How'd you come to that conclusion? So again, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Great questions that you can ask to reverse the burden of proof, but really to get the other person talking and not yourself. All right. You've heard me talk way too much. All right. Here's 6 statements. Buddy up and see if maybe you can even role play for a minute. But just how could you, if you're having this conversation, if someone was making this claim, right? All religions believe in the same God. How could you reverse the burden of proof? How could you find out what they believe? What they mean by that? Asking more questions. What are some ways that you could engage in conversation with this person where you're asking good questions instead of lecturing at them, and just try it for a couple times. Maybe it'll be hard at first, or maybe for some of you it'll be easy. But break up. It will take 5 or 10 minutes, and you can practice this. So maybe you want to buddy up, and someone wants to take the position that they're going to argue this, and they're going to say this, and you're just going to learn that. You're going to practice asking them good questions. All right. So take 5 minutes, and we'll buddy up. These are all kinds of claims that you hear all the time. If you talk to anybody on campus, you hear this stuff all the time. If you're starting a conversation, someone's made some claims to you. You've asked them what they meant by that. You've followed up with how'd you come to that conclusion. You're interested. You're asking some other questions. There's a third technique that we're not going to talk about tonight, which is if you have a little bit of information, that you could say, well, have you considered that? And then you have a little bit of information, but you're asking it in a way you're asking him a question, but again, you're making a statement. But you're asking, have you considered how something can't come from nothing? Or have you considered how there has to be something in order for there to be nothing for the something to come from, which actually isn't nothing, it's a little bit of something. Which, trust me, that makes no sense, but that's the science, right? So the third technique, again, asking those follow-up questions. Again, you're asking good questions, but maybe the conversation just stalls out. Is that okay? Do you have to get to a certain place in every conversation? No, I mean, so you ask some good questions. They answer some questions. Maybe you're at a point where you say, okay, that's let's just leave it there. But let's get together next week, and let's maybe have a chance to think through some of these things. I mean, I know these questions they're asking are hard. Maybe you're wrestling through them right now. Good. Let's meet next week and let's talk about it. Right? I mean, so you're doing that, and then prayerfully you're looking for opportunities. Like Micah said, you're not shying away from the gospel. None of us are shying away from the gospel prayerfully. But we're also looking for ways to advance the conversation as we're building relationship. And so maybe the conversation dies its natural death. That's okay. In other words, what we're trying to do with this, and just learning to ask good questions, can anybody here not say, what do you mean by that? We'll have a session afterwards where we can talk about, and how'd you come to that conclusion? Okay, great. You can all evangelize. All right. So I mean, we just want to make it super easy to do this, right? And so you ask some good questions. You ask some good follow-up questions. Okay, that's interesting. Maybe they said some things that you don't understand. Great. Now come and talk to some of us, and we can maybe give you some other questions you could ask them. But just again, don't feel like you have to get to home runs. What we're asking you to do is just get up to bat. And the more you get up to bat, the more comfortable you'll be in these conversations. Because most of people that are having these conversations that are comfortable in it, they didn't start out like that. They're comfortable with it because they've just done it lots and lots and lots of times. So this helps you, gives you really permission, gives you encouragement just to get up to bat. And that's a good thing. That's a win. If all of us are just getting up to bat and having one of these kind of conversations a day, think about that. If every person in this room has one of these conversations with somebody tomorrow, that'll be a win. Amen?
Hey, Aaron.
Yes.
What's the passage where Christ talks about the Holy Spirit interceding whenever the gospel or the disciples are going to be, in front of whether it be judges, courts, people? I feel like there was a passage where Christ said the Holy Spirit will intercede for you and speak on behalf of what you're saying. You know what I'm talking about?
I think it was Galatians.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, I think one thing again, we're called to just get up to bat. I don't know. I think we could. I don't know. I think we could rely. You could also. Some people I know that use that passage to say, I don't have to study. I don't have to do anything because hey, I'm going to get up there and God, He's just going to give me everything to say. Right. So I think that would be a false understanding of what we're doing there. So I think we want to be prepared. We want to be artful. But again, I'm trusting God. I mean, I think if you have the right view of this, can you ever have a bad conversation? If you have the right intent and you have a good heart, can you ever have a bad interaction? I'd say no, right? I mean, so just we take the pressure off ourselves by we do our part. We trust God for His part, right? And so that I think there's the encouragement we get from that. I don't know if that
cool. Yeah, I agree.
Question good enough. I'm going to skip over this, but just in the interest of time, lots of professors, I'll skip over, but remember, even if your professor is talking, if your professor is stating something to you, Taylor's on her notes that you were given or your PowerPoint, right? You can always, excuse me, what do you mean by that? There is no objective truth, right? Wasn't that what she said on her slide? Yeah, basically. There is no objective truth. What do you mean by that? There is no objective truth? Right? And how'd you come to that conclusion? What objective truths did you understand to understand that there is no objective truth? You can ask these questions of anybody, right? And so this is not just, and again, you're not doing it in as a jerk. You're just asking. Hey, I'm just interested. Tell me, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? To your professors. Your professors tell you, well, we know the Bible's just made up in a bunch of fables. You just raise your hand. Graciously. I'm just interested. Can you tell me how you came to that conclusion? That's. If they make the claim, they should bear the burden, right? So again, all this is just ask, good question. All right, this is important, and maybe we'll look at this one, and then we'll be done. Taking the roof off is actually there's a logical step in logical arguments called a reductio ad absurdum, and this is essentially, that's what taking the roof off is. It's just easier to say than reductio. But basically what this tactic is doing is it's capitalizing on lots of people's ideas that have absurd consequences. Okay? So what you want to do in a reductio on taking the roof off is you want to adopt the other person's view. Okay, so just for the sake of this discussion, okay, I'll adopt your point of view. And then you want to find out, is there any logical or absurd conclusion that follows from this? And then you can do it graciously, but you could ask a question or something that exposes this. But the point is that if it doesn't hold up in these sort of absurd conclusions, then the reasons that the person's given for their argument can't be true. Okay, what do I mean by that? So here's just an example, maybe a silly one, but why did you start smoking? Because all my friends were doing it. So if I wanted to do a reductio, then I could say this, right? Well, if all my friends are doing it, does that mean it's good? Does that mean it's right? Well, so I could just find something, like jumping off a cliff, that all my friends were doing, that would then by definition be good. But clearly people don't believe that, so it can't be a good reason to do something that all my friends were doing. Okay, so you're taking the roof off of the person's argument, all right? So here's some other ways that you could, or some other places you can see that. All religions are true and equally valid. Now we actually looked at this a couple weeks ago. All religions are true and equally valid. What is the basic premise that they're saying? What's the basic premise that someone who's holding this position is saying?
I think they're saying Jesus is not the only way you can get there.
Yeah, like basically all the different religions are basically, they're all basically say the same thing. Okay? So what would follow then would be every position that people take would also be equally valid. So what could I do? I could come up with one scenario that would prove to this guy, that was someone that said that he doesn't believe that. And that would be a position that what? I think that you're wrong and you're going to hell. Now what is he going to think about that? Is that equally valid? Does he agree with that? He's like, that's a very good point. Yes, you're right, I'm going to hell. Of course not. He's going to say, no, that's wrong. You say, okay, well, I thought all religious point of views, all religions are equally true and valid. Right? No, because nobody really believes that. Right? How about this? And again, this is just comments you hear, right? Gay sex has been observed in animals, so being gay is natural and normal. What is the argument that they're making?
We're the same as animals.
If it's been observed in animals, therefore it's natural and normal. Now, what other things maybe have been observed in animals that you probably don't want to normalize. Okay, we can all think of something, right? So you see, the point is that this, now that in and of itself, please hear me on this, that in and of itself doesn't settle anything. It just means that this argument is a terrible argument to try to make the claim that they're trying to make. And all you're going to do is, by using the reductio, is to show them, by graciously, again, that can't be a good reason, because there's lots of things that are observed in animals that we would not want other people doing, right? Okay, so lastly, we'll just take a few minutes and then we'll be done. Try to look at some of these and try to come up with, or see if you can take the roof off these arguments. These are all things that you hear all the time. See if you can wrestle through some of these and, what we say, take the roof off, and then we'll look at a couple of them. So take 5 minutes and do that. So first you want to decide, what is the argument they're making? Are there any absurd consequences if I adopt that point of view, right? And then if there is, then you can see that they are, these are not good arguments. So maybe in your groups, so in your groups of 3 or 4, see if you can find the logical flaw here in these arguments. Tactics, remember, the book Tactics is, again, we could walk through this. In fact, the first semester we were here at UNCW, we spent 6 weeks walking through this. So obviously, this is lightning fast and probably just enough to confuse people. But so get the book. The book is really good, and we've got all kinds of material to help you walk through it. In fact, we'll walk through it with you. Maybe I just want to walk through a couple of these. What if someone said to you, "I was born with a natural tendency to be gay"? So this is one of the arguments. Again, does not settle the discussion. So hear me on this. I'm not saying that this, this settles everything, but it's nature, not nurture. Does that settle the discussion? If it's by nature, because what is the implication? If it's natural, then it's good. So can you think of anything that you are born with that may not be good? This is just, this is, do you guys know do you guys know, ever heard of the group NAMBLA? There's no reason why anybody should.
NAMBLA?
NAMBLA, besides Raleigh. It's the North American Man-Boy Love Association. The pedophiliacs, or whatever, is that right when I say that? Pedophiles, that's right. And you know what their argument is?
It's natural to love.
They were born that way.
No, they
And so if being born a certain way means that's the way things are, what if I was born with a certain tendency to want to punch people in the face every time they wore a UVA shirt? Does that make it okay? Maybe that's right. But just so you see, that cannot be a good argument for something being born that way, because we can all think of something that is our natural tendency that's not good. I can't believe the Bible if it was written by men. The implication is what? If it was written or said by men, then it's false. What's wrong with that? What's that?
Sorry.
Well, I could ask them maybe a question. How'd you go to that conclusion? They could tell me the books that they read that you can't trust to get to the conclusion that you can't trust anything that's written by men, right? If you say you can't trust anything written by men, then you can't trust any of the books that tell you can't trust things that are written by men. You can't trust anything. I can do whatever I want with my own body.
Exactly what?
Can anybody think of things you can't do with your own body? Okay, right, exactly. So just saying you can do whatever you want with your own body is just false. We all know that there's lots of things I can't. I can't just go and punch people in the face just because I feel like it. Morals are relative. What's right and wrong is up to each person. Again, the most we talked about this before, 7% of Christians have a Christian worldview. Almost assuredly, this is where people are going to, this moral relativism is where our young people, maybe some of you in this room, are going to disagree and say that morals are up to culture, they're not objective. But if I tell you morals are relative, what's right or wrong is up to each person, Francis Schaeffer used to do this when he was evangelizing college students. He'd say, well, that's a good point. All right, I'll see you later. And then he would just, he's in the room, and he would just pick up their computer or their coffee maker or something. He's like, all right, see you later. And what are they going to say?
Hold on, wait a minute.
What? No, so
That's
see,
wrong.
right? But you can't do that. It's wrong. It's like, wait a minute, I thought morals were, no, I think it's right. So now what are we just at a crossroads? Like, I think it's right, you think it's wrong? We're like, well, now what do we do? No, like, you're like, no, you can't do that. It's wrong, right? It's objectively wrong. So there's all kinds of implications. If you believe, follow somebody around all day who says that morals are relative, because they'll say lots of things are wrong, right? Or just cut them off in traffic, right? You don't like abortion? Don't have one. What's the implication?
You don't like your mom, kill her.
Okay, you know what? That was a little quick on that one. We're going to talk about that on Wednesday. But, yeah, but you don't like, does it seem like something, this is just like, hey, you don't like Twizzlers? Don't buy one. Don't like abortion? Don't have one. What if I said, don't like slavery? Don't own one. Yeah, right, hey, if you don't like slavery, don't own one, man. But don't tell me what I can and can't do. Does anybody think that's a good argument? No. So you see, this is treating it like it's just some kind of commodity, your favorite flavor of candy or something. I'm personally against abortion, but I don't think we should. But I don't think we should make it illegal. Now, maybe this would take. This is what we call the modified pro-choice position, and this would take one question to sort of uncover. If you ask the person why, it's a good question. Why are you personally against abortion? What would you think the reason would be? In fact, if anybody remembers, which there's really no reason you would, but when Joe Biden was debating, was it in the vice presidential debate?
Sarah Palin?
Was it Palin?
Oh, yeah.
Was it Palin? Anyway, but he holds this position. So he said, I'm personally against abortion, but I don't think we should make it illegal. And I wish that the moderator would have asked this, but why are you personally against abortion? Why do you think they're personally against abortion? Because they think it's wrong because they think
It's wrong.
So then you would say, let me repeat back to what you are saying to me. You think abortion is killing a person and people should be allowed to do that. Now if you say that, they'll get mad at you. That's not my, no, I'm just asking, clarifying, that's your position, right? That is the modified pro-choice position. I personally think that it's killing a child, but I think other people should be allowed to do that. This one, capital punishment is wrong. This came from I think this came from in Texas when George Bush was governor of Texas. There was a lady there who was sentenced to die. I think it was Carla Faye Tucker. I think was her name, and she had murdered some people and. If you do that in Texas, you pretty much definitely get the death penalty. And so she got the death penalty, but she became a Christian in prison. And from everything you could tell, she was like totally reformed, and she was a model inmate. And so all these people were saying that they should commute her sentence. And there was I think it was a nun, made this argument. She said capital punishment is wrong. In this case, but she says in all cases, because Jesus would forgive. So, but think about the implications of that. Now, this again, this doesn't settle whether or not capital punishment itself is wrong, but capital punishment is wrong because Jesus would forgive. So in other words, we shouldn't put Carla Faye Tucker to death. We should just keep her in prison for the rest of her life.
So what does the question be like? Define wrong. Like define your.
Okay, yeah, great. These are questions, as you're asking, what do you mean by that? Great question, what do you mean by wrong? But if Jesus would forgive, so we shouldn't give her the death penalty, what else should we not do with her?
Keep her in jail.
Keep her in jail, because Jesus would forgive. But do you see? So the argument that we shouldn't give her the death penalty because Jesus forgive actually proves too much. Because she wasn't saying that, she was just saying we should keep her in jail forever. But if we should just keep her in jail forever, well, why should we do that? Because Jesus would forgive. In fact, why should we keep anybody in prison? Because Jesus would forgive. So again, that doesn't settle that discussion. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this itself is not a good argument for this. All right, there's a lot more that we could say. The key for any of these conversations, though, is just getting up to bat, having a conversation, and then after it's over, just taking a minute and reflecting, thinking, okay, this person said this. What could I have said better? How could I have done this better? oh, this would have been a better question, this would have been a better answer. I mean, just reflecting on the conversation, and just because you know prayerfully that you'll get up to bat again and again and again. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at having these kind of conversations. And just one story that I think was helpful, would be helpful. When a couple years ago, we did pro-life outreach here on the campus, and it was pretty. We had graphic signs, and a lot of people didn't like it, but we were trying to engage in conversation. And so I was standing out beside the display one time. I mean, this one particular time, and this lady came up to me very, very, very angry, and she was a professor here, and I think she was in anthropology, I think. And so she comes up to me and she was yelling at me basically, and she was saying, the words that you're using are a lie, because we were saying it was a Holocaust. And she said, you don't know what you're saying. And so immediately though, I said, okay, tell me, what do you mean? What do you think Holocaust is? So I'm asking her, what do you mean by that? I'm asking her these questions. I'm asking her, we're engaging conversation. She's very angry. I'm not. I'm calm. I said, okay, well, let's, for the sake of this discussion, maybe let's just agree with that. But what do you think? Do you have a problem otherwise with it? Yes, abortion should be illegal. Everyone has a right to choose. What do you mean by that? Everyone should have a right to choose. So I'm using these tactics. I'm asking her questions. I'm asking her. She's telling me that abortions are just killing potential life. What do you mean potential life? How'd you come to that conclusion? So I'm just asking questions. We had about a 30 or 45 minute discussion. I asked her lots of questions. I got a chance to say, well, have you considered that the only difference between the born and the unborn is size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, the SLED test, which we teach? We'll talk about this in a couple weeks. That's the only difference, and those don't seem to be good reasons to be able to kill anybody. Yeah, because I was asking her questions, but I was asking, and I wasn't yelling at her. We had about a 45-minute discussion, and then at the end of the discussion, she asked me to email her a bunch of stuff. Now remember, she started the conversation by coming at me, basically just yelling at me. She asked me to email her a bunch of some of the stuff that I've been talking about. She shook my hand and she said, "Thank you for having this discussion. You really gave me a lot of things to think about." We put a stone in her shoe. Now we followed up a little bit. I sent her some information. I don't know where she is now, but that's how my heart was changed on this issue. Was someone just gave me some information, put a stone in my shoe. And so just getting up to bat, just having the conversation is a good thing. And again, the whole reason we're doing all of this is we want people to know the gospel. And so we want people to know Jesus. And so maybe that starts off by just asking a simple question is, what do you think about Jesus? Tell me, what do you think about Jesus? And then whatever they say, how'd you come to that conclusion? And that's a great way to start a conversation. You could sit down with somebody tomorrow. Everyone in this room could just say, ask somebody tomorrow, what do you think about Jesus? Right? And that's a great way to start and to get these conversations started. But remember, you don't have to hit home runs. Just get up to bat. All right? All right, last, just a couple of things. This weekend, if you're going to the retreat, if you're interested, if you want to pay, if you're here, come give me your money tonight. Again, I think we've got about 10 slots left. So we'd love to have everybody come. We could actually accommodate probably up to 30. If you're going to be here and you can't come with us, at Christ Community Church, Michael Kruger is going to be here. He's talking about, can we trust the Bible? He's probably one of the experts on the reliability of Scripture. I mean, one of the 4 or 5 in the world that's the best. So if you're going to be in town, we've got some flyers here. If you're interested in that, if you can't make it to our retreat, this is a great thing to go to. It'd be Saturday night from 7 to 9 p.m. Okay? And so let's pray, but some of you don't know, some of you know, some of you don't know Madison. And so all of the things that we are doing here, again, all the things that we're talking about, we want people to know Jesus. And Madison, who was our first president here, they lost. She had a miscarriage last week, and they just got married, and so it's pretty devastating to her. And I was texting her the other day, and she said, "I'm clinging to what I know is true in spite of my heartache." And that's really, I thought that was like the perfect understanding to why do we talk about these evidences? Why do we talk about why we believe what we believe? Because when the wind and the rain comes, not if, but when it comes, are you standing on the rock? And I mean, do we have that solid rock that we're standing on? Now, our solid rock is not our evidences. Hear me, it's Jesus. But do we have good reasons to believe that it's true so that when heartache like that comes, she's clinging to Jesus in this and not running from him? So I want to pray for her. I know probably there's plenty of people here that are suffering as well. We believe that there's grace and there's freedom and there's mercy at the cross. So we'd love to talk to you about, if that's not something that's true for you, if you haven't made a profession of Christ, and what that even looks like, and give us a chance to talk to you about that. We'd love to see people come to the retreat this weekend, because we think that it's going to be a really, really good time, and really a sweet time of fellowship. Yeah, Thomas.
I don't want to wreck the somberness of this moment, but.
Too late.
Just to let y'all know, on Thursday, we're having a get-together. We're trying to get all of the high school Ratio students together. It's going to be Thursday night, and want to invite, if y'all would like to come and hang out with them, interact with them. We're just going to have students from the different clubs from the different high schools get together. John's going to lead a discussion on evolution and creation with them. It's really our first attempt to try to get them together and try to generate a little momentum, because we got small groups of kids at each of these clubs, but to try to gain a little bit of interest and invite some friends. If y'all are interested in coming, getting some pizza, hanging out with some high school kids, come and see me afterwards for the details. I need to know kind of who's going to come, because I'm getting pizza, so I need to know how much to get. But it may be something that if y'all have a free evening, you'd like to come and kind of spend a little time pour your lives into some high school.
And you practice your tactics.
Yeah.
And talking to high school kids. And they would love, the high school kids would love to, to see you guys there. So it'd be great.
Tom, you said this was Thursday night?
It's coming Thursday from
Okay.
6:15 to 7:30.
All right.
So come and see me, and I can give you more detail. I guess there aren't many more details other than the location.